Good morning, everyone. My name's Christine, and I'm usually found hiding in the back of the church with my children. I'd like to wish everyone who's a father, grandfather, or like a father, a very happy Father's Day today. But I hope you get thoroughly spoiled. Today is a very hard day for my family, and so I must apologise, a trigger warning really. Now, because I can't skim read, I'm going to have the paper in front of my face, because if I lost my place, it would take me a long time to, probably 5 or 10 minutes to find it again. So here goes. So my testament is going to form part of this talk, and I will be sharing my experiences of losing my husband Robert to cancer, and the struggles that I had with praying. Now, I didn't really realise when I prepared this talk, a lot of praying went into it, that today would be Father's Day. And Rob died in May 2012, just 9 weeks after diagnosis, but a few weeks before Father's Day. So this will be our 13th Father's Day without him, and he's very much still a missed member of our family. I'm sure that he would be very proud of his children and the people that they have become. And we count ourselves lucky to belong to the family of St Matthew's, and there have been many friends who have acted as father figures to my children, and they in turn have felt comfortable to go to them for advice. And I've even asked for taxi services as well. And of course, in God we have the most loving of fathers. And when I was most in need of prayer during that time, I found prayer difficult. And whilst I don't really remember much of that time, one prayer I do remember, God reminded me as I was praying about this talk, was, I think I call it like stamping my feet or something like that. And it went something along the lines of, Lord, you know that I love you, but right now I want to slap you. And I was angry, I suppose, because I thought God should have healed Robert, and he wasn't with us, and he ought to be. And it might seem strange to address God in these terms, but children most in need of love ask for that love in the most unloving of ways. But it's raw and honest, I suppose, and God can work with our honesty, because if we're honest with God, we're going to be honest with ourselves. And I will tell you at the end of the talk how God answered me. So what do we do if we're experiencing difficulties or facing uncertain futures in need of emergency prayer? And the answer, I think, is twofold. Next weekend, my eldest daughter is going on an expedition for the Duke of Edinburgh Award scheme. She'll be taking on this task in a small group. In the same way, we are meant to journey through life together with the support of others. God never intended us to take the narrow path on our own. When Roman soldiers went into battle, they would get into a tortoise formation. The soldiers would use their shields to form a wall around them and above them that was impregnable to the enemy. They were vulnerable if any of their member broke formation. We need to be accountable to each other and to cover each other with prayer. The people of Judah prayed with Jehoshaphat when they heard that a huge army was coming to attack them. Peter and John prayed with other disciples after being questioned by the Sanhedrin. Before they did anything, they prayed. And we are at our most vulnerable when we are alone and under attack from Satan. I'm a member of a home group, and when I was finding prayer difficult, I would share with the members of the group and they would pray for me. I really value the time that we spend praying for one another, and I get a lot of strength from that. And the church family answered my prayers in many ways, prayers I didn't even know that I had made. There were all the meals people cooked and the childcare that they provided. And if I've never said thank you, I do not remember, then I thank you all from the bottom of my heart. My daughter also needs to be properly equipped for her trip. As she'll be walking, she will need to be taking walking boots, waterproofs, a sleeping bag, a first aid kit, a whistle and emergency rations, among other things. Now, Jesus started his ministry being tempted by the devil, and he used verses from Scripture to defend himself and drive the devil away. Man shall not live by bread alone, for instance, comes from Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 3. He humbled you, causing you to hunger and then feeding you with manna, which neither you nor your ancestors had known, to teach you that man does not live by bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. He used Scripture throughout his ministry whenever he was challenged by the Pharisees. He ended his ministry on the cross, where, after several hours suffering for us, he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Jesus' words appear to echo David in the opening verse of Psalm 22. David spent some time on the run, hiding in caves, eating consecrated bread when hungry, because King Saul had become jealous and wanted to kill him. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me, so far from my cries of anguish? My God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer, by night, but I find no rest. I wonder if perhaps Jesus is quoting Psalm 22, and Jesus would know the most apt verse from Scripture to help him at his time of greatest need. Consider the following verses from Psalm 22, 16 and 18. Dogs surround me, a pack of villains encircle me. They pierce my hands and my feet. All my bones are on display. People stare and gloat over me. They divide my clothes among them and cast lots for my garments. Like Jesus, we need to equip ourselves through this journey through life with verses from the Bible for both good times and bad times. It wasn't that I hadn't memorised verses of Scripture, but the verses I had memorised were of no help at all. When I look at the heavens, the works of your fingers, the moon and the stars set in their place by you, what is man that you should care for him, mortal man that you should remember him? Psalm 8, verses 3 to 5 is one of my favourite passages, but not at all helpful when I felt lost and incomplete. I just hadn't memorised verses that would have helped me pray during one of the darkest times of my life. On the 11th of August 1999, Britain experienced a total eclipse of the sun. The path of totality passed through Devon and Cornwall. I stayed at home and watched it on television, and the moment the moon eclipsed the sun and the sun's corona burst out from behind the moon was really magical. But it was fascinating to learn from a friend when he travelled down to Devon to sit on a patch of grass with hundreds of others to experience the eclipse for himself. In the path of totality, it was dark, it was cold, and it was silent. The birds had stopped singing. Yet the path of totality was narrow enough that the sun could still be seen shining outside the path. The sun was still there and hadn't stopped shining. Yet the moon had blocked the sun so completely that everything below was deprived of its warmth and light. In the same way, our troubles and anxieties can totally eclipse God. God is still there, just a prayer away, but when we do not pray, we deprive ourselves of the greatest source of strength and hope and love that we have. And prayer does work. Look how Peter's life had changed a few months before out of fear. He denied that he ever knew Jesus. But now he is confidently, as we heard in the passage, proclaiming the news of Jesus without fear. And it can be helpful if we're looking back in our lives to see how faithful God has been to us in the past. And remember that the God who is faithful to us in the past will evermore be so now and in the future. And Peter reminds us that God is not slow to answer prayers, even when we feel that God has not answered us. One of the strategies I came up with is I like collecting things, and I have, for example, this is the St. Matthew's verse for 2020. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. And that's from James 3:17. I keep everything. So if I can't, I've always got on hand something that will help me. And this I think of as my emergency rations, like a spiritual Kendall mint cake, I suppose. Again, whenever we have a all-together service and we have a takeaway, I put it in this little bag. So, for example, that I picked up from the church is a little cross. No, not church, the school, when I had to go there for a meeting. We have this little rock here, little stone actually. Rock's probably exaggeration. And it's just to remind us, me anyway, that God is the foundation of our lives and we can rely on him. It's a firm foundation. But my most loved piece is inside this little pot is a glass pebble, I suppose. This represents the pearl of great price, well, for me, but not in the way you probably would have thought. It represents me as the pearl that God paid the highest price for. And the reason I have it is, as I was telling you, I made this, I suppose, as I call it, foot stamping prayer. I was in a really bad place. But 2 months later, we were at the church at Weekend Away, and there was a film about the prodigal son. And the character of the father said these lines, I'm your father and I love you. Except when I heard them, it wasn't the father saying it, it was God. And my immediate reaction, of course, was to break down in tears. God answered the prayer then, I think, because when I prayed, I was alone. But when he answered it, I was surrounded by people who were able to offer comfort and pray for me. And this reminds me constantly, I am not, to use David's word, a worm, but a precious pearl. And the beauty of this is I don't even need to know what to pray for. I don't even need to know the words to use, because God, who already knows me so well, knows what I need. Thank you.